This session is called Social Venturing Conversations, and it's the first of a series. So we're going to be running a series of these social venturing conversations, and they're all going to be around topical issues faced by social entrepreneurs. So although we're part of the University of Cambridge, this is very much about and for social entrepreneurs. So real experiences and how social entrepreneurs have gone about solving those issues, the big issues that we face at the moment. And boy, there are plenty of those. If you'd told somebody in January of 2019 that within 3 or 4 years' time, there would have been a major pandemic, lockdowns, war in Europe, subsequent cost of living crisis, and that doesn't even begin to address the climate crisis, then they probably wouldn't have believed you. So an awful lot of hard times have been experienced over the last few years. And this panel discussion is about how social entrepreneurs have faced up to hard times, adapted, evolved, met those challenges, and how they're able to share their experience with us. I'm Mark Goodson. I'm Head of Practice at Cambridge Social Ventures. We're part of the Centre for Social Innovation in Cambridge, and in turn part of the business school, the Judge Business School. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their social venturing experiences and how they came to be social entrepreneurs. So taking turns, shall we start with Kath Austin?
Yes, I'm Kath Austin. I started a social venture back in, it was called BB and Leaf. Originally, it was just called BB Wraps. Started it in my kitchen. It was a very much kitchen table enterprise. I was creating a film called Beeswax Wrap, and it scaled very quickly off the back of and so we very quickly, we got great customers. We had at our peak 17 employees as well. And up to the pandemic, it was all going very well. As soon as the pandemic hit and all the shops shut, that's when the problem started. So since then, I've moved into another role for another social venture called Form the Future. But I have other detail, and we can move on to somebody else.
Thanks, Kath. How about you, Josh? Tell us your background and experience.
Will do. Well, thank you for having me, one and all. I'm Josh Babarindi, and I first engaged with Mark and his team when I was running my social enterprise, Cracked It, which was London's social enterprise smartphone repair service, staffed by young ex-offenders and young people at risk of offending. It started with me having spent some time volunteering as a kind of youth offending worker in the East End of London. It's very clear that many of the young people I was working with wanted income, belonging, self-worth, but they didn't feel like they could get those opportunities in the legitimate labour market, and so crime is where they ended up. So I sought to find a way to support young people away from crime via employment. And I knew I wanted to harness the tech sector to do that for various reasons. But it was critical to ensure that we tapped into a genuine market. 29% of people have a smashed smartphone screen. The average person swipes, scrolls, or taps on their device 2,617 times a day. But most people, 3/4, don't repair their device in 6 months because it's too inconvenient. And so what we did was set up a model where we ran pop-up repair clinics, phone repair clinics in large workplaces across London, the likes of Deutsche Bank and Barclays and Lloyds and the US Embassy and Ministry of Justice, and many more, about 30 in total, staffed by our ex-offender technicians. Not dissimilar to Kath's story, when the pandemic hit, that changed things a lot. Our model relied on lots of people all being in the same place at the same time in these big, shiny offices. And on the 17th of March or whatever it was, 2020, there were 0 people in offices, and they've still not recovered. Occupancy rates are scraping between a third and half of what they were. And so I will talk maybe a bit about it in some more detail later. But we had 2 options. One, stay afloat on lots of cash that was coming in from grant funders, but not sustainable. Or the other was to decide to close and use our runway and our great contacts and our great team and profile in the sector to create legacy. And the latter is what we did in hard times.
Okay, thanks, Josh. So kind of developing that point, maybe Kath now, what strategies did you kind of use to try and deal with the issues that came with pandemic and everything around that? By the way, Kath, you were cutting out a bit there, so maybe you might want to turn your video off if it happens again.
So when the pandemic, March 2020, we were in the middle of manufacturing order to date for Lakeland, and we shipped it to the days before the pandemic struck. So we were expecting it in June, but of course that order actually was Lakeland for 16. So a 2-month order in that time it wasn't, and what we saw was a massive decline in revenue coming in. And so some of the strategies that we deliberate and very quick to decide what to do, because we knew we didn't have much time, the cash reserves that we had, and so very, very sadly, of our staff redundant, left with a team of 6 down from 17. Knew that with all the shops shut, that was it. We were going to suffer. Rishi Sunak's oh gosh, I can't even remember. The scheme. Sorry.
Rishi's dishes.
Yeah. That came out, and we quickly called everybody back in and just put them on. So the government help was very useful, kind of short-term help. We also took out a bounce back loan, but ultimately making hard decisions was the hard decisions that we had to make, and not think too long and hard. That tells you that you do need to make decisions. And so we only kept that were absolutely essential to be working. We stopped all major outgoings that we didn't need. We wound it back to the absolute bare minimum point. And of course, we're a manufacturing company, so we needed to software at the time as well. And that brought added complexities. Working in a carriage drive just to avoid having to needlessly go into the office. So there was a bit of not so glamorous as well. But I think the biggest takeaway is don't do.
I think Cass just cut out completely on the biggest takeaway. So maybe we could go back to Josh and tell me about the changes and the strategies you had to deploy to try and deal with this.
Yeah, so I mean, it was an interesting one, both in terms of personal strategies and then venture strategies. So for me, I had a real problem with taking a break, taking time out, and having a genuine holiday, because I thought, just throughout my whole time in the organization, I set it up in 2015. I just thought, oh no, if I go away, something's going to happen, and then the whole organization is going to have to close. And after many years of mentors and friends and colleagues convincing me that it would be okay, I went away in the first week of March 2020 on a digital detox retreat. And I came back having not checked my phone at all, and toilet rolls, you just couldn't get hold of them, and people were walking around in masks. I was thinking, what on earth has happened? And I checked my inbox, and what happened in my inbox was all of our corporate partners had messaged to say, sorry, can't come in anymore until further notice, because, you know, of the risk of this virus. And so literally the thing that I was worried about happening while taking some time off actually happened. And I've struggled to take holiday ever since. But on a kind of venture level, what did we do to respond? What we did was we looked to see how we could repurpose the resources that we had, the connections that we had, the assets that we had, in order to still generate the commercial and social impact that we needed to have to make everything work. And so, you know, for us, what we did with our kind of pop-up repair clinic model was we tapped into the internal communications infrastructure of the Barclays and the Lloyds and the Deutsche Banks that we were working with. And, you know, they would send out an email to all their staff saying that we would be in on a particular day so that they could make an appointment, or they would post a message on their intranet or whatever it might be. And so we thought, well, we've still got access to people, just not all in one place. So let's try something. Let's try a model where, so we know lots of people are working from home. Well, let's divide the week, or allocate each day a week to a portion of London, you know, northeast, southwest, basically Monday to Thursday, and let's say to folks, right, on a Monday, we're going to be collecting phones between 8 and 9 a.m. in this postcode. If you live in this postcode, and you know, you want your phone repaired, then book in this way, and we'll drop, you know, we'll pick up your phone, we'll take it to our head office, we will repair all the phones, and then we'll drop it back at the end of the day. And, you know, that yielded some interest. And it was, you know, convenient for people. They're able to get their phones repaired without even having to leave their house. They didn't even have to go to work to get it repaired. The problem was, though, folks were without their phone for a whole day. And before, we would be able to conduct a repair in an hour. And aside from it being a bit of a nuisance from the customer side of things, from our side of things, the service delivery side, it was really difficult as well, because logistically, we had to figure out how to get to all these people's homes, and some, in most cases, they weren't very near to each other. You know, someone in Islington and then someone in Hendon, say, just really, really difficult. And it cost us, a lot of cash in courier fees or in fuel. So that just didn't work. But I'm glad we tried it, because it meant we could test some assumptions and really rule it out. And it was very clear after we had tried that and, you know, one or two other things, that, you know, it just wasn't going to work. And that the model that we'd had, the pop-up model, was the sweet spot, and that wasn't going to come back. And so I, you know, was thinking long and hard about what to do. And it was quite an emotional time as well. I mean, one, just the pandemic, it was just a strange time, and, you know, we weren't getting the social interaction that we typically would have, and that impacted certainly on my own personal resilience, mental resilience. So, you know, I started doing a lot of reading, and I came across a really interesting article. I can't remember how now, but it was published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Mark, you'll remember we were speaking a lot at the time. The article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review was called "Social Entrepreneurs Must Achieve, Not Survive," or something like that. And what this article said is that, look, social enterprises and voluntary sector organizations more generally often start with the best will in the world. They've got a relatively clear mission, often clearer actually at the moment you start than at the moment, moments down the line. And you end up, taking on some grant funding and things like that. But a challenge is that you can become stuck on this treadmill of grant funding, this treadmill of needing to dance to the tune of other interests that are unlikely to 100% align with exactly what you want to do all of the time. And as a result, you can end up drifting from your mission somewhat. And what this article, and that resonated. I thought, there's all these COVID support funds out there that are proposing to give us, fair bits of cash. And we had quite a bit of profile in the sector. So we got lots of approaches. But I could feel this happening. And what this article went on to say is, wouldn't it be great if mission-driven organizations didn't fall into that trap? And in fact, couldn't a great mechanism for that be that whenever an organization sets up, it puts a time limit on its tenure, and it says, look, we're going to be around for 10 years, and by the end of year 10, we're going to have achieved X, Y, and Z. And if we haven't, regardless of whether we have or we haven't, we will close, we'll stop, so that we don't end up surviving for survival's sake. And instead we focus on achieving. And I thought, wow, this is quite a radical idea, and totally counter to the orthodoxy in the sector that, success equals, we just keep the entity going and going and going. And, there's kind of stigma in the social impact sector. Should an organization close, which I found quite extraordinary, because you take Silicon Valley, and entrepreneurs in that setting almost boast about the number of startups that they have run and that haven't worked out, and wear them with badges of honor because there's lots of learning that comes from them, etc. But not the same in our sector, which is really interesting. And so I spoke with one or two organizations who had done a similar thing, or who at least got to a stage where they realized they were drifting, or there was a risk of drift, and decided to shut up shop. So a really influential one for me actually was a great organization called Bite the Ballot, which was a kind of voter engagement charity in the UK, particularly youth voter engagement. Loads of profile in the sector. Many schools have been infiltrated by Bite the Ballot. I remember when I was at school, lots of Bite the Ballot activities we did, and they found themselves in the same position. Spoke to Mike Sarney, the founder, and was reassured actually that the path he took with his organization was the right one, and that a similar thing would be right for us. Imagine what we could do if we stopped trying to spin other people's plates and instead spun ours, or specifically the plates of the young offenders that we were working with, without needing to worry about other stakeholders and other interests. So that's what we did. We had 6 months of cash in the bank, fantastic team, profile in the sector, lots of corporate partners, and what we wanted to do was create legacy beyond the entity that we would close in 6 months from then. And so again, having lots of conversations with people like Mark about this to kind of really sense check some of these ideas and just make sure that I wasn't going crazy. Came up with a number of ideas, like a mentoring program that we ran with Deloitte, that fundamentally changed the way that many employees view ex-offenders and employing ex-offenders, or another project where we onboarded lots of our corporate partners' spaces that we were popping up in, their cafeterias, their lobbies, their reception areas. We onboarded them onto a kind of Airbnb type platform that we set up that matched social enterprises with these organizations, so that where it was still viable for them to collaborate and trade, they could. And we shipped that off to another charity organization, social enterprise called Supply Change, which curates that platform and those relationships.
We got a question from the audience about legacy, so I just wonder if we can finish up that point later, because that's really interesting, all the stuff that's been spun out. I also at this point wanted to introduce another panelist, who's Simon Brown. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, Simon, and then and your venture and how you got into social venturing, and say a bit about how you adapted to hard times and to the COVID crisis, etc.?
Yeah, of course. So hello, everybody. I think I joined the social world 2014, 15. Is it that long ago, Mark? I think one of the early cohorts within the Judge Business School. So my background is in digital agencies, and for personal reasons, I decided to leave that world and working in London to then get into this sector of healthcare, health and social care, and then how you can use digital and data to help people improve their health, or how you can work within the healthcare setting within the country to help improve health. So I kind of, it was like everybody just starting to work out actually what is that pathway, what is that journey, how do you navigate and understand moving forward. Picking up a bit from what Josh was saying, we didn't really use grants. Actually, I set out a stall not to use grants, because you're beholden to, I'd done a bit of work and seen it anyway, but you're beholden to what their requirements are. And that didn't align to where kind of what we were doing and how we were doing. And so certainly trying to use digital and tech and data to drive forward health and social care. It's completely new in this world, in kind of health and social care. Not now, but it was at the time. So nobody actually really got it and understood it. So trying to get funding for it was an absolute, I can't tell you the stress. And obviously without it, you've got to try and have a job and earn some money somewhere and have a living as well. So you've kind of got that stress as well. So I did do some consultancy private work along the side. But how we then got going, I set out a strategy. Our work is to support unpaid carers and family carers. So if you have somebody within your family who has either a health condition, it could be anything from diabetes, it could be mental, it could be physical, emotional, whereby you may be doing the shopping for them once a week, once a fortnight, or you're looking after them full-time care at home, 24/7, taking them to a hospital. You're an unpaid carer. If you do it for 35 hours plus a week, I think you get about £68, give or take, per week from social services for your living costs as a carer. That's your salary. If you don't do it 35 plus a week, and you've got a full-time job and you do it, you obviously don't get anything. So what is the support that's out there? And we kind of understood that if you're working and you're busy, there's these things called, well, you probably can't see it from there, phone technology. I haven't got time to go to these lovely community groups, but I want to use digital and tech to help improve my health and support my circumstances and the person I'm looking after. So we try to fill that gap. So in Norfolk, again, is everybody here from the UK, Mark, or are they further afield?
I honestly don't know, Simon. There
we go. I just don't want to use a location in the country, and people go, where on earth is Norfolk? Where on earth is Norwich and Newmarket and other places? So we went slightly different. We set out a strategy to deliver frontline services for two reasons, and that was to have a contract with the NHS. That is as far as on the east of the country in Norfolk and Suffolk, going down south into Devon, bit of work up in Manchester. So it was quite broad that we covered. That did two things. One, it helped generate income that kind of starts to pay people's wages, which is quite essential as you want to grow. It also enabled us to gain frontline experience with how our kind of key stakeholders were engaged with this world. So you've got end users, people on this call. Without going into too much detail, I know Mark has got lived experience as well in this world. So we got to understand their problems and challenges, and we engaged with the NHS and local authorities, government, basically, because they're the ones who we need to get the money out of, because grants just don't pay enough. So we did that. We then hit, and COVID came along, as Marcus just mentioned, kind of how do we get along with those challenges? All of those contracts gave us is the income and help us grow the business. So in our first year of trading, our turnover was about £31,000. After 3-4 years, we were turning over just short of £500,000 of income and growing a team of about 15 to 18 people. So we had rapid growth, which was great. What that allowed us to do was create what I wanted to do and generate some surplus and profit to create a social media app called The Pod, which we've done. That was the key big thing for us, because it helps us gather data. So if you can imagine how Facebook is, how Instagram is, how Twitter is, it knows everything about us. Can I mention Cambridge Analytica? Is that too much of a, for those that know Facebook and what happened in terms of 82 million, I don't know, harvested data, didn't there? A little bit. Won't mention politics and American politics. I don't know, I might get in trouble. With somebody coming through the door behind me, who knows? Sniped. Now, before I go off at side tangent, that what they did is gather data, and they understand everything that we're doing, everything that you're doing. They know more about your family and your partners than you and I do. So if we can use and gather that data, so you don't have to fill out these BuzzFeed, for example, and you fill out kind of what's your favorite pizza. If you add a dog and the street you live at, that's your card, and it's your favorite name or something stupid, isn't it? It's just gathering data. So asking how many coffees do you have a day? By us doing that, we can understand if you have what your sugar intake is, what your caffeine intake is. Do you drink red wine? Do you drink beer? How often? And you start to gather a health picture. We were due to launch that in March 2020 this year. It was commissioned and contracted by the NHS. So we'd gained some real traction and success. At the same time, with our strategy, because delivering those initial contracts we had were not part of our long-term strategy, we kind of let those go to some charities. We had a dilemma in the middle of the COVID. Because that happened, the NHS had to say to our new social media app, The Pod, that kind of got put on the back burner. So we couldn't progress that because they need to put money, time and effort and resource towards COVID, obviously. So what did we do with these other contracts we had? Do we follow our moral and ethical compass and let them go to the charities? Or do we be complete commercial capitalists and just think, we need the income and money? Hopefully you won't be surprised to know that we followed our moral and ethical kind of compass and actually said, no, we've got to let those go because that's what we've agreed. You just, yeah, that's not good form to do that. That wouldn't have happened in the private sector previously where I was. I had no chance, but that's just not what we're doing. So coming back to what Mark was saying, we went from turning over £500,000 after 4 or 5 years to zero, absolutely nothing, because we had to let those contracts go and we didn't have this NHS contract. So for the last 3 years, I have literally then started taking up some work within the NHS. I read a book actually during lockdown. It was called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, I believe. It's the founder of Nike, or Nike, however you pronounce it. Really good. I read some other books as well, but that was a really good poignant one, because when he set up his business, he had exactly the same challenge in that he couldn't earn enough money by himself being employed in the business and to pay staff. It just wasn't happening. So what he did was then go back to being an accountant, and he worked full time as an accountant whilst working, whilst employing people in his business. And as soon as he got to a certain level, 4 or 5 people and growing it, then he was able to wind down being an employee as an accountant and then start to grow his own business. So he effectively had 2 jobs. So we're going back into what, 60s, I think it was around that time when it was really growing. So I read that and essentially followed the same kind of concept and model, hence why I've just had a meeting that I've come out of and doing some work within the NHS. Funnily enough, on the NHS app for about the last kind of 12 months, working on that and using my digital knowledge and expertise around that, and still do work in that sphere now, whilst at the same time have built and grown the pod app and social media app. That has kind of been my whistle stop short journey so far, with a lot of pain. Didn't help that my wife was also made redundant from her job in the private sector as well through all of that, so we had even less money. But you just get through, don't you? You get through somehow. And we've still got to do a lot of more tech work because things have advanced in terms of governance and data. Come back to Cambridge Analytica and the NHS. Since the app has come out, they've become a lot more wary in terms of governance, GDPR, etc. That came into force just before COVID as well, didn't it? So it's extra layers of nightmare. But yeah.
Simon, it's really interesting that you say somehow, but we coped, didn't we? Or somehow we coped. So I'm really interested in that. But this thing about, coping, Kath, I see that you've moved rooms, so maybe we can try you out again and see if your audio is any better, and ask you, how did you cope? How did you manage the stress of all the tough decisions that had to be made during this time?
That was one of the hardest things. During the pandemic, I was homeschooling, and my partner and I both worked on the business, and so we kind of tag team swapped between stopped working. And because it was like Groundhog Day, it was really draining. A Teams call where you have a glass of meat, but it was those sorts of things that mattered then. I think one of the biggest things that you can do.
Hey, Kath, I think we're gonna have to stop you there and move on to Josh. Hey, Josh, so I was asking about how personally you managed the stress, involved in these times, because it must have been difficult for you, even though you had a clear kind of legacy plan to call a halt to what you were doing and move on to something else.
Well, I'd just come off a well-being retreat, so I ought to have learned all the tools. How did I deal with it? I think something that was most important is that when I realized that things were not going right, I needed to be talking to people about those and not, just try to put on a brave face and pretend it was all okay. So I was very open with my team. I mean, it was, impossible for team to not to see that things weren't working, business model wasn't working. But we brainstormed together. We were really all in it together. So that was really important. Likewise, I spoke with fellow social entrepreneurs and friends about about things not working and the need for big pivots. And that was quite important because I think a lot of the time we're sharing as social entrepreneurs great stories and great things about what we're doing. And it can, as a result, sometimes for me at least, feel like everyone seems to be smashing it and doing well all the time. Am I the only one who's struggling here? So important to kind of be open, honest, and share in that respect as well. And then thirdly, in terms of sharing, it was important for me to have the courage to share how things were going with external, people external to my own personal network, to share, well, like I did with you, Mark, at the time, about, we've got these problems and, this is kind of what I'm thinking. I, shared with our corporate partners and said that I know we spend a lot of time, trying to impress you and the rest, but want to let you know we're facing difficult times here. Can you help? And many of them did. So I think that was really important. And another kind of saying that we had in the office, not just during these hard kind of pandemic times, but at any time, generally, I don't know, we might have a massive customer complaint because a repair hasn't gone right and, their phone has been, irreparably broken or something that happened on one occasion. And we had a saying in the office, which is, well, nobody died. So, it could always be much worse. And actually with every there were two phones that went not quite right. One irreplaceable and one we were able to sort. And we committed to buying goldfish and naming them after each of the customers we became very acquainted with, to remind ourselves. Instead, we had kind of tokens of various things around the office, and it was important to basically try to, by making light of some of these situations after the event, it was important to gain perspective about what was really important. And fundamentally, what was important about what we were doing was, asking the question, are we helping kids get out of crime and move towards more positive futures? And that was the thing that really kept us going, all of us. So remember your mission, but also lean on people for help.
That's great, Josh. And what about you, Simon? I mean, not only during COVID, but I mean, with the cost of living crisis now, the people you work with, carers, must have been particularly, are still being really hard hit by that.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, no, it's huge as well. And the biggest challenge as well that we had in terms and talk of just posts about grants. There was quite a lot of grant money put out there from central government to go and do some initiatives. When you have people like ourselves and others on the front line who are then putting forward ways to help support people during COVID, a lot of people became unpaid carers due to COVID as well. It, of course, doesn't hit the front line. So as much as you kind of create the right answer to deliver that, to make the pennies go further, without getting into a small p political kind of discussion about where those contracts went, it doesn't come to the front line, and it didn't. And those unpaid carers, you just rely on other people to help you get there. And I think that's how people got through COVID, if you like, in terms of supporting each other as a community, is then how social entrepreneurs get through when you don't have any money and any income and it's just not happening. It's because the drive for making something happen, that human, what sits inside their driver to achieve, is greater than the kind of the driver to make more money, to make more profit, to kind of make the business achieve. I don't know about others, but for me, it's always a mindset. It will happen. It's just a case of how it's going to happen and what's my path and journey to get there. And nothing stops until I've achieved that end goal.
There's some interesting questions here from from people in the audience. So one question perhaps for you, Josh, was the decision-making process and how to balance, making quick decisions and fast decisions, which is often important, to be decisive, with getting the big decisions right, and how that's balanced. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. It does sometimes take me a while to make a big decision, because I really want to very thoroughly be confident in it and stick by it when I've made it, ideally. And so I think when you feel backed into a corner and like you've got to make a decision quickly, I think it is important to unpick why the urgency seems to be around it. And if when you do unpick the why and it transpires that, well, because there's a deadline that is an external deadline that's immovable and essential to me in an hour, then fine, you've got to make a quick decision. But if actually a deadline can be shifted, or actually if it transpires that the urgency is just coming from you, and from your want to move on from this situation as quickly as possible, it's important to bring that into check, and to not allow that to get in the way of you sourcing all the information and maybe other people's opinions that can help you to arrive at a decision you can stand by. So I really resist being bounced into quick action. In terms of kind of how that played out in my setting that I described, let's take being in a position where our pivots weren't working. fortunately, we had a good amount of cash in the bank, so I wasn't going to not be able to pay people next month, type thing. We had a good few months of money to play with. And so that was important because lots of businesses were just closing. Lots of businesses were furloughing lots of people. They were closing, etc., etc. It could have been very easy to get caught up in all of that, and no, that wasn't my instant reaction. In that particular setting, it kind of, the momentum for the decision that I fundamentally made to close the organization built over a period of time. So, I came across this article which posed this really interesting question about basically, managing your end game and closing well. And then I spoke to some, folks who had done it before to understand a little bit more about it, and again, get some more ideas to help me make the decision. And yeah, it got to a point where I felt ready to make it. And then I'm the kind of person, once I've made a decision, then bam, I will then execute it as quickly as possible. And that's what I did, but in a managed way, to make sure I brought my team and my corporate partners and others with me, and that's exactly what happened.
Great. And it's interesting in chat. Great to see that people are having a chat amongst themselves, which is great. And some interesting points by, for instance, Thor, about the importance of having information that's as real time as possible to be able to make good decisions. How difficult it is to make good decisions if you don't have real time information, and the importance of that. Simon, there's another interesting question in chat about supporting teams, and we talked about how resilience for the founder and the entrepreneur is important, but there must also have been a big role in terms of supporting other people in the team. I think you said you built the team up to, was it 10, 15 people, something like that?
Yeah, full time, and then some additional kind of part-time people on top of that. I'll tell you what the biggest challenge we had in terms of what we were doing. So we were the first organization, whether it be charity or social enterprise in the country, the UK, to create a carer support service that was 7 days a week. And that was Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. And then also at weekends, 4 hours on a Saturday, 4 hours on a Sunday. But in order to do that stretch of 8 till 8 and weekends, we then had to create a workplace infrastructure that allowed people to come into the office to work, but also work from home. And we then had to break down the workforce shift into 4-hour slots, because that was just easiest to manage, because you have to take into consideration where's the workforce going to come from, what's the demographic and makeup of them. Some people we employed were on benefits as well, and so they couldn't work over 16 hours or 12 hours, otherwise that impacted their income. Of course, some of those were unpaid carers because that gave us first-hand experience. Others were parents, mostly mums. That then involves, if you're working an evening time, well, who wants to travel to work if they can help it 8 o'clock at an evening? Who wants to travel to work on a weekend when they've got family, they've got the school run, they've got their own caring requirements? So we had to create what we now know as flexi working, hybrid working. It's commonplace during COVID and post-COVID, but beforehand it wasn't. So it's I say completely new. It was a very new way of working, of allowing people to work home. You've got the digital and IT infrastructure. How do people then connect and pick up phone calls? How do they pick up messaging services? So we implemented digital as a way of providing that support that wasn't really there. And still, charities haven't picked it up now, how to do it. It's quite commonplace. If you go onto a chat, I don't know, BT, Sky and other products, you chat with somebody down the bottom right-hand corner in the screen. Not a bot, but a human being for us. That's the norm now. But it wasn't back then. You can manage up to 12 conversations at once quite happily around that, whereas a phone call, you can only do one. How do you manage morale when you're taking phone calls from somebody who's in distress, or there is a need for 999 to be involved, emergency services, and that happened. How do you manage morale during COVID? And we delivered services throughout COVID with our staff as well, when everybody's mental health has been impacted, and you're not there to have a chat with somebody about your own circumstances or your personal circumstances. Regular catch-ups daily with somebody you're working with your line manager, your team manager, weekly catch-ups. Where possible, we would say come into the office if you want to do so. And of course, with all the social spacing that was needed, we made it open and people had that choice of flexible working. But we made sure whenever somebody finished a shift, a line manager, a senior manager would speak to them after the end of the shift, before the beginning of a shift, during the shift as well, to see how they're getting on. Yeah, tough for everybody, to be honest. Even before COVID, it was still quite tough because it was a new way of working.
I mean, with these kind of multi-layers of support structures, I can't remember in your case, Simon, but you've got a board of directors or board of trustees, and how important was that in terms of supporting you and the rest of the enterprise?
Yeah, huge. Yeah, huge. So we set up with a board of directors, and that was a mix of both. So it's myself working on a day-to-day basis. I had another person, Sophie. She sat on it as well as part of that senior management, senior team, as she was delivering very much the front line. And then we had people who were then an arm's length involvement. So they knew what was going on, but weren't then caught up in the day-to-day. So they could offer that external, outside looking in support, comments, direction, because you can't see the wood for the trees if you're too far stuck in it. And then people had nothing to do with what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. Again, just to offer that outside looking in perspective. There was obviously no sort of return in terms of their time and input. They just did it as you would a charity trustee, just a slightly different legal structure. But it helps having that mix of people involved day to day to explain what's going on, arm's length to know what's going on, but still offer that view, and those completely outside of it who had no idea what was going on. So you just get the fresh ideas and fresh views. I didn't always agree. I didn't always enjoy it. I didn't like being challenged. I still don't now, but I know it's important. And we made sure we had a mix as well. There's a lot of talk about equality, diversity, inclusion. We did it at the beginning. And that's some of the things I picked up actually from being on the program for 12 months with Mark and Belinda and co. Diversity is huge, undervalued of how we had that in inclusion, just to make sure we got the different views. Because my one view may be great for the business, but it doesn't represent all of the unpaid carers across the country. So yeah, I think that was actually, I didn't appreciate it to begin with, Mark and others, the need for it. But it was one of those things that people said, you need to have it, you need to have it. And it's just that drip, drip, drip. Now I'm like, oh yeah, they were right. I don't tell them too much, but obviously, yeah. I tell you now, Mark, you were right. And so is Belinda, yeah. It worked.
Josh, what about you? What about you? Because I guess, you got a board that, is part of your support structure, but you also had to sell them on your epiphany that the right thing to do was to go out there and create legacy ventures.
There were board members, and also we had an investor, a social investor as well, who they weren't on the board but were a really important stakeholder, and I was really worried about sharing this crazy idea with them because well, they had invested with a view to getting a return, a social return, yes, which we were, delivering, but also a financial one, which by proposing to close the organisation, we wouldn't. And so, there's a key lesson that I would take from that actually is to engage with them even sooner. That advice that I gave before around, speaking about when things aren't going wrong as early as possible to people, because the response won't be as bad as you think it might be, if it's bad at all. Really, really important. I kind of was nervous, so I didn't really share the full extent of my thinking until I had made a decision. But yeah, that was that's a key learning. And then in terms of board, so what was actually really exciting is that I onboarded board members after making the decision, and so there were folks who, you know, the pitch, actually, my pitch to them was be part of the legacy making in our swan song. Yeah, that was a really different approach to board recruitment. But you know, it meant that, you know, together with my staff team, we were surrounded by people who were, you know, really believed in this path that we were taking.
That's great. I'm mindful of the time for everybody on this call. We got about 3 minutes to go. I guess I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't ask you both if you have got any final words of advice or encouragement for social entrepreneurs in the audience who are now still in tough times. Is there anything, you know, any final words of encouragement you would give them, Josh, since you've got the mic?
I would reiterate, you know, the importance of asking for help, no matter how difficult or not it might feel, and also, you know, coming back to this point around it being more important to achieve than survive. That's been a real driver for me, even in my shenanigans post running my social enterprise. So these days I'm a parliamentary candidate, standing in my hometown of Eastbourne. It's a marginal seat between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, and I'm the Liberal Democrat guy. And in that role, I'm able to pursue a lot of the campaigns and the impact that I was aiming to drive when running my social enterprise. And so maybe less a piece of advice, but more an observation or a reflection from me, is that the impact journey does not have to end with the entity. Legacy can be created in all different sorts of ways, in the way that I described earlier with Cracked It, and indeed in the form of whatever one might go on to do beyond their time at the entity. For it is the case that every entity is finite. It's just a matter of when it ends and when your involvement in it ends. So give a thought to what it looks like on the other side.
Thanks, Josh. Simon, any final words of encouragement or advice?
Have no fear. So have no fear. Make a mistake, never mind, carry on. Make another. I've made loads. I still make mistakes now. But actually, we've grown a business and we've grown social enterprises, and actually we've done some real kind of game-changing stuff in what we do. Some groundbreaking stuff, and still doing it now. Just keep moving forward. I always follow one thing. Actually, it came from when I went on school exchange to Germany as a kid, 14-year-old. It was a diesel before diesel became big. It came from Germany. I think it had on it, "Fortune favours the brave," and I loved it. And it's stuck with me ever since. Fortune favours the brave. So, yeah.
Thanks, Simon. Fortune favours the brave. Some good words to end on. So I'm going to have to wind up the session. I'd like to thank our fantastic panelists, Kath, Simon and Josh. Shame about Kath's tech, but we'll probably have her back in future on a better line. Couple of things to mention as we wind up. This is the first of a series of social venturing conversations, so please keep an eye on our social media for details of the next one. And it's interesting what Josh was saying towards the end, because one of the sessions probably will be on founder transition, what happens to founders when eventually they do move on. And another final thing to say as well is that if you are a social entrepreneur and you're interested in applying for the Cambridge Social Innovation Prize, I've just put the details in chat, then applications will be closing soon. So if you've not heard of that, this is an annual award for 4 outstanding social entrepreneurs. We, Cambridge Social Ventures and the Centre for Social Innovation, we run that in conjunction with Trinity Hall College. Each winner gets £10,000 to spend on personal development and 12 months support from a mentor at Cambridge Social Ventures. So if you are interested, I would encourage you to apply for that. So once again, I'd like to thank all of the audience. I'd like to thank our panel, and hope to see you at the next social venturing conversation.